You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunima. Yesterday, March 5th, the U.S. Senate Committee for the Judiciary held hearings in Washington that called for what civil rights group Palestine Legal says are investigations into the First Amendment protected activities of university students who courageously organized for over 15 months to bring an end to Israel's genocide in Gaza. The Senate hearing, Palestine Legal adds, relies on the false conflation of support for Palestinian rights with anti-Semitism. This conflation allows for anti-Palestinian and anti-democratic actors to pretend to care about Jewish safety while they really silence advocates for Palestinian freedom. This comes on the heels of U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order targeting college students who participate in protests or speech activity that is critical of Israel's genocide, as well as his social media announcement on March 4th that, quote, illegal protests on college campuses will result in that university's loss of federal funding, expulsion or arrest of students, and that agitators on student visas will be deported. These measures are part of an expanding witch hunt of U.S. students organizing for Palestinian rights and the acceleration of university administrators' repression of their students at the service of pro-Israel donors and relationships with Israeli institutions. But students are not backing down to these bipartisan attacks on free speech and Palestinian rights. In New York City, students at Columbia University and Barnard College have been engaging in more than a week of sit-ins, protesting Barnard's decision to expel 3 students, one for allegedly protesting the university's investments in genocide and allegedly participating in the occupation of Hinds Hall last year, and 2 for allegedly disrupting a class on the history of modern Israel. Students say that these expulsions are the first of their kind since students engaged in anti-war protests in 1968. And they say that the first protest resulting in expulsion was in the 1930s when a student dared to criticize Columbia's ties to Nazi Germany. Last week, after a 6-hour standoff, the university finally conceded to the demand for a negotiation on the expulsions. However, just before the scheduled meeting, Columbia intermediaries attempted to change the terms and force students to stall negotiations. That same day, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a McCarthyite federal task force to quash anti-genocide protests by investigating 10 college campuses, including Columbia University. According to the announcement, Columbia was privately informed of the task force's impending visit just one day before Barnard expelled the 3rd student. Students say that rather than engaging with them or divest, Barnard has rushed to satisfy the U.S. Department of Justice by sanctioning and expelling students. And yesterday, students held another sit-in protest at the campus library, which they renamed the Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya Liberation Zone in honor of the Palestinian pediatrician and head of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia in northern Gaza, who was abducted by Israeli soldiers in December and remains in Israeli jail. Throngs of New York City police, which was tasked with, quote, managing the protest by the administration, arrested and assaulted students. Meanwhile, university administrators rolled out the red carpet to welcome former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who spoke on campus at Columbia. And today, Thursday, he is due to speak at Harvard University in Boston. While Bennett, who famously boasted about murdering Palestinians while he was in the Israeli army, saying, quote, I've killed many Arabs in my life and there's no problem with that, is being given the red carpet treatment by the administrators of these elite U.S. institutions. Students are organizing protests in defense of Palestinian rights and risking their academic careers in order to do so. Here's a few seconds of footage of the protests in New York against Bennett's event yesterday.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine!
And we are happy to be joined now by 2 members of the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Group, which has been part of the Barnard sit-ins this week, to talk about the current state of repression on their campuses and where this movement goes from here. And they are coming to us as anonymous students. We will not share their name nor their image because of the level of repression by the administrators and the New York City Police Department against them right now. Both students, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So tell us about the sit-ins. What happened yesterday and what you're demanding from the administration?
So yesterday was really a continuation of action that we've been performing since last week. This is obviously in response to the two expulsions that you mentioned, Noura, from the alleged classroom disruption of the history of modern Israel. And yesterday was I think, a really shocking and harrowing sight for all Columbia students. I mean, even you can see on Broadway, obviously the main street outside where the sit-in happened, you had it felt like the whole student body out there to watch, to chant, to support the students. And obviously the biggest event of the night was the bomb scare called in by the NYPD, which basically led them to call in all their SRG, their strategic response group units, in these massive vans and buses to clear out all the protesters from the main library at Barnard, which is called the Milstein Center. And because of this bomb scare, which the president of Barnard, Laura Rosenberry, said later was a very specific pipe bomb threat in Milstein, that they cleared off all the protesters and they made a perimeter even down the street, leading to the arrests of a few students and clearing out all the protesters outside of the Milstein Center. So it was a really shocking sight for a lot of people. Personally, even watching it, it was a very scary experience.
And that bomb threat, which the university claimed came in, we don't know from where, but it was very convenient for sure. And Columbia University Students for Justice in Palestine posted this picture. Tamara, if we can put this up, which shows, and the caption of that was posted by SJP is, NYPD brought detained students into the library they claimed had to be cleared due to a bomb threat, while still supposedly investigating that bomb threat. So what does that tell you about the good faith or lack of it with which the administration is proceeding against students like yourselves, whose crime appears to be speaking out against genocide?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say here, but I think if this was a genuine bomb threat, and there was actually a bomb in the Milstein Center, which that's the building you see in this picture right here, that's where the sit-in happened. If there actually was a bomb in that building, like you said, there are clear pictures of them taking the detainees and the arrested protesters into the building. And this is, keep in mind, simultaneously, while they're moving all the protesters off to the left. So this is while they're moving it to make a perimeter around the building, yet here they are taking all these protesters into the building where their alleged bomb threat is. So if the bomb threat was real, there seems to be a lot of disparity and hypocrisy between responding to protesters in the area and then students and faculty. Also, if you look at other pictures and videos of the sit-in yesterday, you can see people leaning out of windows on the first and second floors recording, as on the ground floor there are protesters being pushed like 2,000, 3,000 feet to the left. So for some reason the bomb threat was only seen to be on the ground floor, and none of those people were cleared out. Not to
Well, might have just lost them.
difference in the response between protesters. And if it wasn't a bomb threat, it shows, just how far President Rosenberry and NYPD and the Barnard admin are willing to go to clear out disruptions and protests.
Yes, go ahead. Student number two.
Oh, sorry. Yes, everyone was told to shelter in place extremely conveniently, everyone else on campus, and there was no bomb squad or SWAT called in. It was SRG, which is infamously known for arresting protesters. So the idea of a bomb threat, whether it was true or false, endangered everyone, though, yeah, it's up to your interpretation.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, Columbia University said that they had tasked the NYPD with, quote, managing the protests. They didn't even acknowledge why there was a protest, of course. And can you talk about the Naftali Bennett speech and the timing of it, and what that signals to students and faculty who are trying to protect the rights of Palestinians and are being told that they are possibly engaging in criminal behavior by exercising their right of free speech and academic freedom to protest someone like Naftali Bennett, who boasts about his war crimes, who, I mean, has a record that is horrifying if you study, anything about international human rights law or Palestine in general. Can you talk about the timing of the administration rolling out the red carpet for someone like Naftali Bennett?
Yeah, I can take this. I think seeing as how SIPA, especially the dean of SIPA, Karen, she is known for being extremely supportive of the IOF. And I think a lot of
That's
And
the
what's
School of International and
yes,
Public Affairs,
yes,
and you're talking about her support for the IOF. You mean Israeli Occupation Forces?
yes, that's correct. So on that day, every part of campus was closed down except one. Cops were called in. SRG was called in at 4 p.m. We couldn't access food, housing. Everything had to go around to 116th and Broadway, constantly calling protesters the danger. Outside agitators are the danger to campus. But in Rosenberry's email to everyone, for some reason, a group of protesters were more of a danger than a bomb threat, over and over again. Someone who brags about killing Arab people is less of a danger than students.
Talk about the general atmosphere for students on campus in the sense of, I hear from friends at Columbia that the campus is constantly under lockdown. You are speaking to us anonymously. Students who are taking part in protests are covering their faces, disguising their identities. I mean, what has brought us to this level of, if this was happening in another country, what would US based human rights groups or US based officials be saying about this? How do you understand the situation we're in?
I think it's extremely clear that they will do anything. They will inflict violence upon us. They will destroy our relationship with our neighborhood and our community members who cannot access the subway, who cannot enter campus, massive entire city blocks that they are supposed to be using under law. They will do all of this to protect their donations from Zionist donors, to squash all protests for Palestine, to just keep things in order. But it's actually incredible because right now we're having a rally, and the bravery of my comrades is extremely inspiring. Like, the fact that we were able to pull off a sit-in last week and this week, people aren't scared. When one person's expelled, 100 more will rise up. I truly believe that, and it's happening.
Hmm. Can you talk about the U.S. Department of Justice's so-called Task Force on Anti-Semitism and the significance of Columbia University's capitulation to the government's announcement that it will investigate these universities ostensibly over Palestine rights activism? How are students organizing? What kind of preparations have you made? And have you been able to talk with administrators about the what this will mean for students exercising their rights to protest?
Sure, yeah. This has definitely been very top of mind to both us at Quad, Columbia University, Apartheid Divest, and the administration. We've seen that repeatedly in the emails and communications they've sent out to us. there's this since the announcement of the task force and government investigations, there has been stronger language about, using quote unquote whatever means necessary, or crack down on these quote unquote outside agitators, or like this attempt to like belittle us to some sort of like small fringe community, even though literally yesterday there was the Student Government Authority of Barnard, which obviously represents the student body, issued a very strong email and statement to the administration saying, essentially, this is ridiculous, and how have you promised us never to bring on the NYPD, and you've went and broke this promise. So this is very clearly top of mind for them, is that they feel this pressure of, the DOJ and Trump and the federal government looming behind them, and they're trying to respond more harshly to us, I think, in an attempt to, acquiesce to that pressure. But this has really failed, because yesterday, even after the sit-in, the President Rosenberg, the president of Barnard, reached out, agreeing to a meeting. And obviously now we're in, current discussion and internal communication about how we're going to approach that, whether we're going to take it, what conditions, etc. But still, the fact of the matter is that they're trying to crack down on us, but they can't stand in the face of the entire student body being against divestment, being against their expulsions, the NYPD, and all of this. So yes, definitely top of mind, but I think our, like my colleague mentioned, it's very inspiring to see just how much we'll rally together against that.
Yeah.
And just very recently, Yoav Kish, Israel's education minister, met with Columbia University's president, Katrina Armstrong, reportedly to discuss campus anti-Semitism and strengthening U.S.-Israel research ties. And just last week, former CIA director and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who of course was in the first Trump administration and is a very far-right supporter of Israel, announced that he's joining the faculty at Columbia. He joins such other illustrious figures on the faculty as Hillary Clinton. What does this tell us? I mean, is the university just doubling down on its efforts to placate Israel and its supporters while throwing its own students under the bus? What do you think is driving all this? You already mentioned an interest in appeasing donors, but also put this in a broader context for us in terms of what you see happening at other universities. For example, at Harvard, where Naftali Bennett is scheduled to speak as well, and with various universities officially adopting the Israel lobby's definition of anti-Semitism. I don't know who wants to take that. Either of you could take that.
Nope. Maybe neither.
Give me 1 second.
Go
Let me.
ahead. Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. I think they're also doing a lot of organizing as they're speaking to us, because the sit-ins, the protests haven't stopped.
Yeah, they're ongoing, and
Yeah.
they were ongoing late into the evening yesterday, with the NYPD being called in yet again. I
Yeah.
mean, just
Yeah.
now the universities are calling the cops on their own students. It's absolutely
Yeah. That's
incredible.
unconscionable.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think. Okay, so I think there's definitely a lot, like we mentioned, about donors and external pressure, external Zionist pressure. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm sure you guys have picked this up, but there have been a lot of leaked group chat pictures coming out of Columbia students and alumni, working together to specifically target, this is obviously following the Trump orders, students here on visas that are protesting in the pro-Palestine protests to try to deport them. So I think there's a lot of external pressure, working with students or alumni or faculty to go after these protests. I mean, if you read in the leaked group chat pictures, there was I vividly remember one person in the group chat who mentioned that they ran like a finance firm, a private equity firm in New York, and how he was independently meeting with the Columbia Endowment Committee or board or whoever was in charge of it to put pressure on them, like basically completely in the private sector, but put pressure on them to not give up to divestment and other similar demands that we're making. So that does seem daunting for many.
And I think, just sorry to interrupt, I
Yeah.
think you're also referring, there was some reporting in the Tamara, in the Intercept. Tamara, I just put that in the StreamYard chat last month about these WhatsApp groups of well-connected people, major donors, billionaires, and so on, using these chat groups to really plot against students and faculty at Columbia who support Palestinian rights.
Yeah, I also want to mention that I think as big as outside pressure is in terms of donors and alumni, the university itself this isn't antithetical, like squashing advocacy for Palestine isn't antithetical to what this university is about. Like, this university is founded on slavery, on extraction, on separating who gets access to it versus the community that it extracts from. Like, we are studying Western masterpieces of art and music and philosophy and history. This isn't about this. It talks about being a global university, but it's always going to prop up imperialism because that is what sustains it.
Mm-hmm. Well, finally, can you talk about where these protests go from here, and advice to other students? I mean, here in California, the so-called task force is coming to, quote, investigate UC Berkeley over the same claims, that are being levied against Columbia and Barnard students. What advice do you have? What has sustained your protest this far, and what do you think students should be preparing for?
My advice to other students would be to be brave and rely on each other. I think one of the amazing things that we have going for us is that we have collective defense, so we are committed to taking care of one another, and we know that when one of us is in jail, all of us are not free yet. So things like protecting each other at jail support and with discipline, like making sure we are prepared, but also the fact that I am scared, we are scared. It's dangerous. There's violence on our campuses. It's dangerous to be participating in a sense, but also we have a duty to Palestine. We have a duty to make sure that our money is not going towards bombing people always.
Yeah, and to bounce off of that, we make a very proactive effort to always ground ourselves in what's happening on the floor in Palestine. In every single one of our meetings, our rallies, protests, actions will always start with a update, Palestine news update of what's going on the ground. Even our decision to name the sit-in yesterday after Dr. Hassan al-Safiya, like this is so intentional to force big media that pick up this sit-in to talk about. Obviously he is still currently going through this problem. He's still currently incarcerated, but even Hinz Hall last year, to force media to pick up and talk about the martyrs in Palestine. So, to keep ourselves grounded in the horrors and atrocities of what's happening in Palestine, and to keep that perspective has really pushed our movement as a community collectively together and given us that inspiration and also humility to keep fighting in the face of all this pressure and terror tactics of the administration and NYPD and outside forces.
Yeah. And just also a reminder that groups like Palestine Legal, the ACLU, Center for Constitutional Rights, which is based in New York City, FIRE, there are all of these civil rights groups that are working with students every day to protect their rights to free speech and academic freedom, to remind administrations that free speech is still a thing, no matter if a self-described task force comes to investigate students, that there is still protections that students are afforded, and so just always a shout out to Palestine Legal and those other civil rights groups, for for legal advice, for protection. Um, Anything else you want to say about the protests, and how people can learn more and support?
I would say to find people in your community who are organizing. Like in every community, you start extremely small and you go to actions with them. You read, you have mutual aid events, you tap in where you can, at what you're good at. And in that way, everyone has something to contribute. And reading about Palestine, not focusing on so much on student protesters who are getting arrested, which is important, but also it's a fraction of what's happening and what we're fighting for.
Well said. All right. Thank you both, Columbia University Student 1 and Student 2, both members of Columbia University Apartheid Divest. Keep us posted. Of course, we'll be watching, and we hope to have you both back on as soon as possible. Thanks so much.
And please know, and please let your comrades know that you have the support of people all over the country and all over the world. And you are voices of conscience in a world that too often people are not willing to put anything on the line the way you are. So we truly thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so
Students
much.
are the
Appreciate
vanguard.
it. Having on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Oh, well, I'm glad we got them.
I am too, and how sad that in the United States, where Donald Trump claimed that free speech is back, students don't feel safe enough to speak publicly about something like genocide. It's just shocking to me, and that the university administrators are entirely complicit in this. And one thing I want to say to our viewers who are alumni of various colleges or universities, including some of the ones we've mentioned, is a lot of this pressure is coming from alumni and donors who support genocide and who support Israel. And so we can also put counter pressure on. So pay attention to what is happening at your alma mater. If you have been to one of these universities that is repressing student activists, and maybe write to the president, write to the alumni relations office, and make your own voice heard, and tell them that you object to them repressing the voices of students speaking out against genocide. I think that's another thing that many of us can do to support them.
Well, thank you. Just it's just unconscionable to see once again the administration of Columbia invite the cops, the NYPD, that has a budget of a small country, on to violently attack and intimidate and abuse their students, who, as you say, are just trying to oppose genocide and oppose their university's ties and complicity with the genocide. So we'll have much more on that. Of course, that's a story we're going to keep following.